They say justice is blind, but in courtroom 4B, justice was just another thing money could buy. Julian Sterling stood there in his $3,000 suit, pointing a manicured finger at a woman whose only crime was surviving. He called her a leech. He laughed at her worn-out shoes. He told the judge she wasn't worth the dirt on his Italian loafers. He thought he had won. He thought the gavel was about to end her life. But he forgot one thing: the dead can still speak. And when they do, they don't whisper. Watch what happens when a billionaire's secret daughter reveals her true identity seconds after being humiliated. This isn't just a court case. It's an execution of ego. The rain in Seattle was relentless. A cold, biting drizzle that seemed to seep into the very marrow of the city's bones, inside the formidable King County Superior Court. However, the air was dry, stale, and smelled faintly of floor wax and old fear. Cassidy Hart sat in the back row of the gallery, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She was wearing a grey sweater she had bought at a thrift store in Belltown 3 years ago. It had a small snag near the left cuff that she had tried to mend with thread that didn't quite match. To anyone glancing at her, she looked like a ghost, pale, thin, and entirely out of place among the mahogany and marble. She wasn't a ghost, though. She was the defendant, or at least the respondent in a civil suit that threatened to strip her of the tiny, dilapidated apartment she called home. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. It was electric. Julian Sterling, the man suing her, was laughing. It wasn't a loud laugh that would be uncouth, but a low, rumbling chuckle shared with his lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Benedict Crow. Julian was handsome, in the way predators are handsome: sharp jawline, ice-blue eyes, and a smile that didn't reach them. He was the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, a tech conglomerate inherited from his late father, Arthur Sterling. "She actually showed up," Julian whispered loud enough for Cassidy to hear. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke navy suit. "I thought she'd be halfway to Oregon by now." "Desperation makes people do foolish things, Mr. Sterling," Crow replied, shuffling a stack of documents that looked heavy enough to crush a skull. Cassidy didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the judge's empty chair. She was 24 years old, working double shifts at a diner called the Rusty Spoon, just to pay for her mother's medical bills before she passed. Now Julian Sterling, a man who had never worked a physical day in his life, was claiming that the small plot of land her apartment sat on belonged to the Sterling estate. He wanted to bulldoze it for a parking lot for his new luxury high-rise. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the bailiff bellowed, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Halloway." Judge Halloway was a stern woman with steel-grey hair and a reputation for hating time-wasters. She took her seat, her robes rustling like the wings of a crow. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the docket. Sterling Estate versus Cassidy Hart. She read, her voice flat. Dispute over property title 409B. Counsel proceed. Crow stood up, buttoning his jacket with a smooth, practiced motion. "Your Honor, this is a simple case of squatting. My client, Mr. Julian Sterling, is the sole heir to the Sterling Empire. We have unearthed deeds dating back to 1985, proving the land in question was purchased by the late Arthur Sterling. Ms. Hart has no legal claim. She is simply lingering." He let the word hang in the air like a bad smell. Judge Halloway turned her gaze to Cassidy. Cassidy stood up, her legs trembling. She didn't have a lawyer. She couldn't afford one. "Ms. Hart," the judge said, not unkindly. "Do you have representation?" "No, Your Honor," Cassidy said, her voice shaking. I have letters from my mother." She said Arthur gave her that house. He wanted us to be safe. Julian let out a loud scoff, throwing his head back. Letters, Your Honor, please. We are talking about property law, not fairy tales scribbled on napkins. My father was a philanthropist, yes, but he didn't hand out real estate to every cleaning lady he employed. The courtroom tittered. A few law students in the back row smirked. Cassidy felt the heat rise in her cheeks. Her mother hadn't been a cleaning lady. She had been Arthur Sterling's personal archivist. But Julian didn't care about the truth. He only cared about the narrative. I have the letters here, Cassidy insisted, reaching into her canvas tote bag. Inadmissible without authentication, Crow cut in smoothly. Your Honor, this is a waste of the court's time. Look at her. She can barely afford her rent, let alone the legal fees to contest a title deed. We are offering her a settlement of $5,000 to vacate within 48 hours. That is generous, considering. $5,000. It wouldn't even cover the debt Cassidy still owed the funeral home. I don't want your money, Cassidy said, her voice gaining a sudden surprising steel. I want my home. It's all I have left of him. Julian froze. He turned slowly to look at her, his eyes narrowing. Of him? You speak as if you knew my father. You were nothing to her. A charity case, a tax write-off. That's enough, Judge Halloway snapped, banging her gavel. Mr. Sterling, control yourself, or I will hold you in contempt. But Julian was rolling now. The arrogance of the billionaire class fueled him. He stood up, ignoring his lawyer's restraining hand. No, Your Honor. I think the court needs to understand who we are dealing with, Julian sneered, walking toward Cassidy. He stopped just short of the personal space boundary, looking her up and down with visceral disgust. Look at her shoes, Your Honor. The soles are peeling. Look at that bag. It's filthy. This woman is a professional victim. She thinks because she's poor she deserves pity. She thinks because she struggles she's entitled to a piece of my pie. He turned to the gallery, spreading his arms. My father built an empire on excellence, on strength he despised weakness. And you, he pointed a finger directly in Cassidy's face, you are the definition of weakness. You are a stain on this city. Take the $5,000 and go back to the gutter, or I will bury you in legal fees until you starve. The courtroom was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. It was a level of cruelty rarely seen in open court. Cassidy stared at him. She didn't cry. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she felt a strange sensation in her chest. A unlocking. Before the judge could scream at Julian, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a resounding crack. Two men in dark suits entered. They were followed by a woman in a wheelchair, pushing herself forward with surprising vigor. She was elderly frail, but her eyes were sharp as diamonds. It was Beatrice Sterling, Arthur's estranged sister. The woman Julian had put in a rest home 3 years ago to keep her quiet, and behind her walked a man carrying a distinct silver briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. Julian's face went pale. Aunt Beatrice, what are you doing here? Beatrice wheeled herself to the center of the aisle. She ignored Julian completely. She looked straight at Cassidy. I'm here to correct a mistake, dear, Beatrice rasped. Her voice was weak, but it carried to every corner of the room. And to read the real will. The silence that followed Beatrice's entrance was heavy, suffocating. Julian looked as though he had been slapped with a wet fish. He blinked rapidly, his composure fracturing. The real will, Julian stammered, his polished accent slipping. What are you talking about? Father's will was probated 2 years ago. I am the executor. I am the beneficiary. This is dementia. Your Honor, my aunt is not well. I am perfectly sane, you little viper, Beatrice snapped. She turned her wheelchair toward the judge. Your Honor, my name is Beatrice Sterling. I am the sister of the late Arthur Sterling. The man standing beside me is Mr. Elias Thorne, senior partner at Thorne, Weatherby and Associates in Zurich. Mr. Thorne, the man with the briefcase, stepped forward. He was tall, severe, and looked like he ate gravel for breakfast. He bowed slightly to the judge. Your Honor, Thorne said, his voice a deep baritone. I represent the private trust of Arthur Sterling, established in 1998, under Swiss jurisdiction. I apologize for the interruption, but the activation clause of Mr. Sterling's final testament was triggered exactly. He checked a heavy gold pocket watch. 45 minutes ago. Judge Halloway leaned forward, intrigued. Triggered by what? Thorne looked at Julian, then at Cassidy. By the filing of a lawsuit against Miss Cassidy Hart regarding the property at 409B. Julian laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. This is absurd. Why would my father care about a lawsuit against a squatter crow? Get them out of here. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, Judge Halloway barked. Mr. Thorne approached the bench. I want to see this document. Crow, sensing a disaster, tried to intervene. Your Honor, surely we cannot verify the authenticity of a Swiss document in moments. We request a recess. Denied, Halloway said. She took the document Thorne handed her. She adjusted her glasses, reading in silence. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed to grow louder. Cassidy stood frozen. She looked at Beatrice. The old woman winked at her. A slow, deliberate wink. Why? Cassidy whispered. Because Arthur knew, Beatrice whispered back. He knew Julian was a shark, and he knew you would need protection. What does it say? Julian demanded, his voice rising in panic. I am the CEO. I own 51% of the voting stock. Nothing can change that. Judge Halloway looked up. Her expression had changed. She looked at Julian not with annoyance, but with something closer to pity. Then she looked at Cassidy with wide-eyed astonishment. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, you may read the summary to the court. I believe it is relevant to the case at hand. Thorne placed the silver briefcase on the plaintiff's table, shoving Julian's papers aside. He unlocked the cuffs, then the case. Click, click. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue velvet. Arthur Sterling was a man of many secrets. Thorne began, addressing the room. He built a $1 trillion legacy, but his greatest fear was that his wealth would be consumed by greed and arrogance. He watched his son Julian grow up. Julian bristled. He loved me. He observed you, Thorne corrected coldly. He saw how you treated the staff, how you treated your partners, and how you treated the vulnerable. He knew that one day you would try to destroy the one thing he loved more than his company. Thorne turned to Cassidy. In 1999, Arthur Sterling met a woman named Sarah Hart, your mother, Miss Cassidy. Cassidy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. They were never married, Thorne continued, but they were in love. Arthur wanted to marry her, but his board of directors threatened a revolt, and his first wife, Julian's mother, threatened to destroy the company. So Arthur made a deal. He would stay provided Sarah and their child were kept safe. Julian's face went purple. Lies. My father never had a bastard child. He had a daughter, Thorne said, his voice booming. Cassidy Hart is not a squatter, Mr. Sterling. She is your half-sister." The gallery erupted. The press in the back row began furiously typing on their phones. "Order!" Halloway shouted, banging the gavel. "Order! Being his bastard doesn't mean she gets the money." Julian screamed, losing all control. "The will stands. The 2021 will gave everything to me. The 2021 will," Thorne said calmly, "contained a poison pill clause. Clause 7A. It states, should the primary beneficiary, Julian Sterling, ever attempt to use the resources of the Sterling estate to legally or physically harm Cassidy Hart, the 2021 will is immediately rendered null and void." Julian stopped breathing. The room spun. "And," Thorne continued, turning the page, "in the event of nullification, the estate reverts to the 1998 trust, which names a new sole beneficiary." Thorne looked at the girl in the grey sweater with the snagged cuff. "Miss Cassidy Hart," Thorne announced, "as of 9:00 a.m. this morning, when Mr. Sterling's lawsuit was formally entered into evidence, you became the majority shareholder of Sterling Dynamics. You own the skyscrapers. You own the banks. You own the patent portfolio. And," Thorne paused, a small smile touching his lips, "you own the building Mr. Julian Sterling currently lives in." Cassidy looked at Julian. He was trembling, gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The man who had mocked her shoes 5 minutes ago was now staring at a woman who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. This is a joke," Julian whispered. "You can't do this." "It is done," Thorne said, snapping the book shut. "The court recognizes Cassidy Hart as the legal owner of the Sterling estate. The value is estimated at approximately $1.2 trillion. The judge looked at Cassidy. "Miss Hart, it seems the motion to evict you is moot. In fact, since you now own the plaintiff's law firm," she gestured to Crow, "I believe you can instruct them to drop the case." Cassidy looked at Crow. The lawyer immediately stepped away from Julian, smoothing his tie. "Ms. Hart," Crow said, his voice dripping with sudden oil, "it is an honor to meet you. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot." "You called me a leech," Cassidy said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the silent room it sounded like thunder. She looked at Julian. The power dynamic had shifted so violently, the air felt thin. "You mocked my shoes," she said to him. "Cassie." Julian tried a desperate fake smile, plastering onto his face. "Sister, look, we can work this out. Family is family, right?" Cassidy looked down at her worn sneakers. Then she looked up at the billionaire. "I think," she said, "I'm going to need a new lawyer. And Julian." "Yes?" he asked, hopeful. "Get out of my chair." The rain outside the King County Superior Court hadn't stopped, but for the first time in her life, Cassidy Hart didn't feel it. She was ushered out of the side exit of the courthouse by a phalanx of security guards she didn't know she employed. They moved with military precision, creating a human wall between her and the sudden swarm of paparazzi that had materialized within minutes of the verdict. "Ms. Hart. Ms. Hart. Is it true you're Arthur Sterling's daughter? What are you going to do with the company? Julian says you're a fraud. Comment." The questions were like physical blows. But Elias Thorne was there, his hand gently guiding her elbow. He steered her toward a waiting vehicle. It wasn't a taxi. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom painted a deep midnight blue. "Get in, Miss Hart," Thorne said, his voice low and steady. "The windows are bulletproof. The world is very loud right now, but inside it is quiet." Cassidy slid on to the cream-colored leather. The door thudded shut with a heavy, reassuring seal. The silence was instant. Beatrice was already inside, pouring herself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter built into the console. "Brandy?" Beatrice said, offering a glass to Cassidy. "You look like you're about to faint. Drink it. It's older than you are." Cassidy took the glass, her hands still trembling. She looked down at her grey sweater. The snag on the cuff seemed to mock her. "I can't go to the headquarters looking like this. I look like who I am. A waitress." "You look like the woman who just took down Julian Sterling without lifting a finger," Beatrice corrected. "But you're right. Perception is power. Thorne." From the front passenger seat, Thorne turned. "We have a stop scheduled at the Rainier Square Tower. A personal shopper has been alerted. We have precisely 45 minutes before the emergency board meeting." "Board meeting?" Cassidy choked on the brandy. "I don't know anything about running a conglomerate. I know how to balance a till and how to fix the espresso machine when it jams." Thorne's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. They were cold grey and oddly comforting. "You have instincts, Miss Hart. Your father watched you. He had private investigators track your progress. He knew you put yourself through community college at night. He knew you managed the finances for that diner when the owner was too drunk to do it himself. He knew you saved every receipt. You have an accountant's mind and a survivor's heart. Julian has neither." The car glided through the Seattle streets. Cassidy watched the city pass by the same streets she had walked in the rain just hours ago, because she couldn't afford bus fare. Now the city looked different. It looked like a game board. They stopped at a high-end boutique that didn't have a sign, just a frosted glass door. 3 assistants were waiting. There was no browsing. They measured her with their eyes, pulled garments from racks, and within 20 minutes the grey sweater and worn jeans were gone. Cassidy stepped back out to the car, wearing a tailored black pantsuit that fit as if it had been sewn onto her skin, a silk blouse the colour of heavy cream, and heels that added 3 inches to her height, but didn't hurt. She looked severe, elegant, and dangerous. "Better," Beatrice nodded. "Now to the Lion's Den." The Sterling Dynamics headquarters was a 70-story spire of glass and steel dominating the skyline. It was a fortress of capitalism. As the Rolls-Royce pulled up to the main entrance, Cassidy saw him. Julian. He was standing on the curb, surrounded by 3 security guards. His security guards, or rather the company's guards, who were currently barring his entry. He looked disheveled. His tie was loosened, his hair wild. He was screaming at the head of security, a large man named Marcus Graves. "Do you know who I am, Graves? I hired you, I can fire you and make sure you never work in this state again. Let me in." "I can't do that, Mr. Sterling," Graves said, his face impassive. "Your clearance has been revoked. Access code, red 0. "Revoked by who?" Julian shrieked. "By that gutter rat!" The Rolls-Royce stopped. Thorne opened the door. Cassidy stepped out. The sound of her heels clicking on the pavement silenced Julian mid-scream. He turned. He blinked, not recognizing her for a split second. The transformation was absolute. "Cassidy." He breathed the name, tasting like poison in his mouth. "Hello, Julian," she said. Her voice was steady. The fear she had felt in the courtroom was gone, replaced by a cold clarity. You think playing dress-up makes you one of us?" Julian sneered, stepping forward. "You're a thief. You manipulated a senile old woman and forged a document. I have lawyers drawing up an injunction right now. You won't even get through those revolving doors." Cassidy looked at Graves, the head of security. "Mr. Graves?" "Yes, Ms. Hart," Graves replied instantly. Snapping to a posture of respect, he had never shown Julian. "Is this individual an employee of Sterling Dynamics?" As of 9:15 a.m., no ma'am. HR processed the termination based on the moral turpitude clause in his contract. "Then why is he loitering on private property?" Cassidy asked calmly. Julian's jaw dropped. "Loitering, I built this building. Your father built it," Cassidy corrected. "You just rented the penthouse." She turned back to Graves. "If he's not off the premises in 2 minutes, call the police. I believe we have a zero-tolerance policy for harassment." "Yes, ma'am." Graves signaled his team. 2 large guards stepped toward Julian. "Don't touch me." Julian spat, backing away. He pointed a shaking finger at Cassidy. "This isn't over. You don't know what you've walked into. The board will eat you alive. They hate outsiders. They'll chew you up and spit you back to the trailer park." "We'll see," Cassidy said. She didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked through the massive glass doors. Inside the lobby was cavernous. Hundreds of employees were there, pretending to work, but all eyes were on her. The silence rippled outward as she walked toward the private elevator bank. She felt the weight of it then. The $1 trillion weight. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting a war her father had started 20 years ago. As the elevator doors closed, shutting out the lobby, Cassidy looked at her reflection in the polished brass. She didn't see the waitress anymore. She saw Arthur Sterling's daughter. "Ready?" Thorne asked as the elevator rocketed toward the 70th floor. "No," Cassidy said honestly, "but open the doors anyway." The boardroom of Sterling Dynamics was designed to intimidate. A massive oval table made of black walnut sat in the center of a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. 12 people sat around the table. 10 men, 2 women. They were the captains of industry, the power brokers of the Pacific Northwest. They wore suits that cost more than Cassidy's annual salary at the diner. When Cassidy entered, followed by Thorne and Beatrice now back in her wheelchair, nobody stood up. The atmosphere was hostile, thick with skepticism. At the head of the table sat Archibald Vane. He was the chairman of the board, a man in his 70s with a face like a crumpled dollar bill and eyes like flint. He had been Arthur's right hand, and he had tolerated Julian because Julian was easy to manipulate. Cassidy walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. She didn't sit. She placed her hands on the leather back of the chair and looked at them. "So," Archibald Vane grunted, tossing a pen onto the table. "The prodigal daughter. I must say, Ms. Hart, this makes for excellent tabloid fodder. But running a global conglomerate is not a reality TV show." "I agree," Cassidy said. "We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders," Vane continued, his voice rising. "The stock has dropped 4% since the news broke this morning. The market hates uncertainty. And you, my dear, are the definition of uncertainty. We have prepared a buyout package. $20 million. Cash. You take it, you sign over voting rights to the board, and you go live a very happy life somewhere warm." A murmur of agreement went around the table. They wanted her gone. They wanted the status quo. $20 million, Cassidy repeated. "That's a lot of money." "It's a fortune," Vane said, smiling patronizingly. "More than you could spend in 10 lifetimes." Cassidy looked at Thorne. Thorne handed her a slim file folder. "It is a lot of money," Cassidy said, opening the folder. "But it's significantly less than the $45 million that disappeared from the R&D budget last fiscal year." The room went dead silent. Vane's smile vanished. "Excuse me," Vane said, his voice dropping an octave. "I spent the last 3 years taking care of my mother," Cassidy said, pacing slowly down the length of the table. My mother was Sarah Hart. You all knew her as the archivist, the help. But Sarah kept copies. She digitized the internal ledgers Arthur brought home. She taught me how to read them. She stopped behind a heavy-set man named Davids, the CFO. Mr. Davids, Cassidy said. Project Blue Sky, a renewable energy initiative, budgeted at $800 million. But the shell company receiving the funds is registered in the Caymans to a P.O. box owned by your brother-in-law. Davids turned pale. He reached for his water glass, his hand shaking so hard the water sloshed onto the table. Cassidy continued walking. And you, Mrs. Gable. She nodded to a stern woman in a red blazer. The head of operations. You've been outsourcing manufacturing to a factory in Vietnam that was flagged for safety violations 3 times. You saved the company 12%, but you pocketed the difference through a consulting fee paid to Gable Solutions. Cassidy reached the head of the table. She leaned in close to Archibald Vane. And you, Mr. Chairman, you knew about all of it. You let Julian run wild, spending company money on jets and parties, because as long as he was the distracted playboy, you and the board could strip the copper wiring out of the walls of this company, and no one would notice. Vane stood up, his face red. This is preposterous. You are accusing us of... I am accusing you of grand larceny, corporate malfeasance, and fraud. Cassidy said, her voice cutting through his bluster like a diamond saw. And unlike Julian, I don't just want to be rich. I want this company to be clean. She tossed the file onto the table. It slid down the polished wood, stopping perfectly in the center. Mr. Thorne has already sent digital copies of these ledgers to the SEC and the FBI. Unless... Vane froze. Unless what? Unless you resign, Cassidy said. All of you, effective immediately. You can't fire the whole board, David sputtered. The company will collapse. The company is rotting, Cassidy shot back. I'm cutting out the infection. I have a list of junior executives, people who actually do the work, people you've overlooked for promotions because they weren't part of your country club. They are ready to step up. They are hungry. And they are honest. She looked around the room. You have 5 minutes to sign the resignation letters Mr. Thorne is passing out. If you sign, we frame it as a strategic retirement. You keep your pensions, but you leave the industry. If you don't sign, well, the FBI is already in the lobby downstairs. It was a bluff. The FBI wasn't downstairs yet. Thorne hadn't sent the emails yet. They were sitting in his drafts folder. But Cassidy played it with the stone-cold face of a poker champion. Vane looked at Cassidy. He looked at the file. He looked at the fear in David's eyes. He realized the game was over. The waitress had outplayed the masters of the universe. Vane slumped back into his chair. He took a gold pen from his pocket. You have your father's eyes, Vane muttered bitterly, and his cruelty. I have his will, Cassidy said. Sign. One by one, the pen scratched against the paper. It was the sound of a regime crumbling. When it was done and the boardroom was empty save for Cassidy. Beatrice and Thorne, Cassidy, finally let her knees buckle. She sat down in Vane's chair. Remind me, she exhaled, to never play poker with you. Thorne said, a rare grin breaking his stony face. The FBI? I figured they were paranoid. Cassidy shrugged. Rich people are always afraid someone is watching. Beatrice cackled, clapping her hands. Oh, Arthur would have loved this. He hated Vane. Hated him. But Cassie, darling, you know this isn't the end. I know, Cassidy said, swiveling the chair to look out at the city. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the Space Needle. "Julian is out there," Cassidy said quietly, "and he won't stop. He has nothing left to lose. That makes him dangerous." "He has allies," Thorne warned. "Shadow investors, people who lost money today because of your purge. We need to be careful." Just then, Cassidy's phone buzzed. It was an old, cracked Android she hadn't replaced yet. A text message from an unknown number. She opened it. "Enjoy the view. Waitress, the higher you are, the harder the fall. I'm not done. I found something in Father's old lake house. Something he didn't put in the briefcase. Checkmate soon." Cassidy stared at the screen. "What is it?" Beatrice asked. Cassidy stood up. "Julian, he says he found something at the lake house." Thorne's face went white. Genuine fear. "The lake house, but that was burned down 10 years ago." "Apparently not," Cassidy said. "Get the car, Thorne. We're going for a drive." The drive to the Sterling Lake house took 2 hours, winding through the dense, evergreen forests of the Cascade foothills. The rain had returned harder now, turning the dirt road into a river of mud. The Rolls-Royce struggled for traction, its massive engine growling against the incline. Inside, the silence was heavy. Cassidy looked out the window, watching the trees blur into a dark green tunnel. "Elias," she said, breaking the silence. "You said the house burned down 10 years ago. How could Julian find anything there?" Elias gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "The house burned, yes. It was an electrical fire, officially. But Arthur was paranoid. He built a panic room beneath the wine cellar. Reinforced, concrete, independent oxygen supply, fireproof. If Julian found the entrance code, he could access whatever Arthur stored there." "Why didn't you empty it?" Cassidy asked. "Because," Beatrice spoke up from the back seat, her voice trembling slightly. "Arthur wouldn't give us the code. He said it was his insurance policy. He said if the world ever turned on his true heir, the truth would be in the basement." "I thought the briefcase was the insurance," Cassidy said. "The briefcase was the shield," Elias said grimly. "The basement, that's the sword. And now Julian has it." They rounded a final bend, and the ruins of the lake house came into view. It was a skeleton of blackened timber and stone jutting out of the mist like a broken tooth. Police tape from a decade ago fluttered in the wind, bleached white by time. But there was something new. Fresh tire tracks cut deep into the mud near the old carriage house, and the heavy iron grate that covered the cellar entrance had been winched open. "Stay here," Elias commanded, reaching into the glove compartment and pulling out a handgun. "No," Cassidy said, opening her door. The cold mountain air hit her like a slap. "If this is about me, I'm going in." They descended into the dark maw of the cellar. Elias used a high-powered flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. The air smelled of wet ash and mildew. They stepped over charred beams and debris until they reached the far wall. A massive steel door stood ajar. Inside the panic room, the air was stale. It was a small room lined with metal shelves, but the shelves were empty. Papers were scattered on the floor. "He was here," Elias whispered. "He took the files." Cassidy knelt down. She picked up a stray piece of paper. It was a medical receipt from a clinic in Switzerland, dated 1995. "What was he keeping here?" Cassidy asked. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the corner of the room. Cassidy jumped. It was a laptop sitting on a metal desk, the screen glowing blue. A video file was paused. A sticky note on the keyboard read, "Play me, sister." Cassidy reached out and pressed the spacebar. The video crackled to life. It was grainy footage time-stamped 3 days before Arthur Sterling's death. Arthur was sitting in this very room, looking frail, speaking directly to the camera. "If you are watching this," Arthur wheezed, "it means I am dead, and if the wrong person is watching this, then God help my daughter." On the screen, Arthur held up a document. "I have done many terrible things to build this empire," Arthur confessed. "But the worst thing I did was lie to the woman I loved. Sarah thinks I am the father of her child, but I am not." Cassidy stopped breathing. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I was diagnosed with azoospermia in 1985. Arthur continued, his eyes sad. "I cannot have children. Julian was not my biological son either. My wife adopted him secretly to secure her position. And Cassidy is the daughter of the only man I ever feared, a man I destroyed to take his company." The video, Arthur leaned closer to the lens. "But I loved her as my own. I raised her in secret. I gave her my name in the trust. But legally, biologically, she has no claim to the Sterling bloodline. If this medical record gets out, the will can be contested on the grounds of fraud. The DNA test was faked. I paid the lab." The screen went black. Cassidy stood frozen. The room seemed to "It's a lie," she whispered. "My mother, she never lied to me. She said he was my father." "Arthur lied to everyone," Beatrice sobbed. "He wanted to protect you. He knew if the world knew you weren't a Sterling, the wolves would eat you." "Julian has this video," Elias said, his voice hollow. "He has the medical records. He has the proof that the DNA test was forged. He's going to release it," Cassidy realized. "He's going to tell the world I'm a fraud. He's going to say I tricked the court." "If he does that," Elias said, "the board will reinstate him. You'll be arrested for grand larceny. You'll lose everything. The company, the money, your freedom." Cassidy looked at the black screen. The man she thought was her father had just destroyed her from the grave. "Who?" Cassidy asked, her voice hard. "What?" Elias asked. "He said I was the daughter of the man he destroyed. Who was he?" Elias hesitated. He looked at Beatrice. Beatrice looked away, shame etched into her wrinkles. "His name was Gabriel Hunt Sr.," Elias said quietly. "He was a tech genius in the 90s. Arthur drove his company into bankruptcy, bought his patents for pennies, and drove the man to suicide. Sarah was Hunt's assistant before she met Arthur." Cassidy felt sick. Her entire identity, the narrative of the poor secret daughter, was a lie. She wasn't the heir. She was the daughter of the victim. "We have to go," Elias said urgently, checking his watch. "Julian isn't just going to release this to the board. He's going to release it to the world. We need to get back to the city before the market opens." "And do what?" Cassidy asked, tears finally stinging her eyes. "Admit I'm a nobody." "No," Elias said, holstering his gun. "We fight. Truth is relative in court, Cassidy. But in the court of public opinion, the only thing that matters is who tells the better story." As they ran back to the car, Cassidy's phone pinged. A notification from a news app. Breaking news. The billion-dollar con Julian Sterling promises explosive revelation at 6:00 p.m. press conference. She had 4 hours. The ride back to Seattle was a war room session. Elias was on the phone with 3 different legal teams in Zurich, London, and New York. Beatrice was scouring the internet for leaks. Cassidy sat in silence, staring at the rain. She felt stripped bare. The grey sweater she had thrown away felt more real than the silk suit she was wearing. "We can file an injunction to stop the broadcast," Elias said, covering the mouthpiece. "Claim the medical records are forged. Stall for time." "He has the video of Arthur," Cassidy said. "You can't forge that. If he plays that video, I'm done." "Arthur was sick," Beatrice argued. "We can claim he was delirious, under duress." "No one will believe it," Cassidy said. "People love to see a Cinderella story crash and burn. It validates their cynicism." They arrived at the Sterling Tower. The mood had shifted. The security guards who had saluted her that morning now looked at her with suspicion. The whispers in the lobby were louder. "Is it true I heard she's an actress he hired? Julian is coming back." Cassidy marched to the elevator, ignoring them. She needed to get to the CEO's office. She needed to think. When the elevator doors opened on the 70th floor, she stopped. Sitting in the receptionist's chair, feet up on the desk, was Benedict Crowe, Julian's lawyer. "You can't be here," Elias snarled, stepping in front of Cassidy. "I can," Crowe smiled, holding up a piece of paper. "Emergency injunction granted by Judge Halloway 10 minutes ago. Pending the review of new evidence regarding the paternity of the claimant, all assets are frozen. You can't enter the office, Ms. Hart." "Get out of my way," Cassidy said, "or what you'll spill coffee on me." Crowe laughed. "Go back to the diner, sweetie. The game is up. Julian is on his way. He's bringing the police." Cassidy felt a surge of rage, but Elias grabbed her arm. "Don't. If you assault him, you give them the ammunition they need." They were forced to retreat to a small conference room on the 68th floor. It was humiliating. The billionaire CEO hiding in a break room. "We need an ally," Elias said, pacing the room. "Someone who hates Julian enough to help us, even if you aren't a Sterling." "Who?" Beatrice asked. "Everyone in this town worships money. And right now the money is moving back to Julian." "Not everyone," a deep voice said from the doorway. They turned. Leaning against the doorframe was a man who looked like he had walked out of a noir film. He was tall, with dark hair slicked back and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He wore a black trench coat over a suit that cost more than the Rolls-Royce. "Who are you?" Elias demanded, stepping forward. "The name is Dante Hunt," the man said. The room went deadly silent. Hunt, the son of the man Arthur Sterling had destroyed. The brother Cassidy never knew she had. Dante walked into the room. He didn't look at Elias or Beatrice. He looked straight at Cassidy. He had the same dark eyes as her, the same intense stare. "I saw the news," Dante said. "Julian is bragging about a video about my father." "He says," Cassidy swallowed hard, "he says I'm your sister." Dante studied her face for a long moment. Then he let out a short, sharp laugh. "Arthur Sterling was a liar and a thief," Dante said. "But he was also a romantic fool. He didn't steal my father's company. My father gave it to him." "What?" Cassidy and Elias said in unison. "My father was dying," Dante said, walking to the window. "Pancreatic cancer. He knew he couldn't protect his family from the sharks. So he made a deal with the devil. He gave Arthur the patents, and in exchange Arthur promised to protect Sarah, my father's mistress, and their unborn child. You." Dante turned back to Cassidy. "You aren't a Sterling, Cassidy. You're a Hunt, and that means you don't own 51% of this company." Cassidy felt her heart sink. "So you're here to help Julian bury me?" "No." Dante grinned a wolfish, predatory smile. "I'm here to tell you that the patents Arthur bought, the contract, had a reversion clause. If the Sterling line ever failed to produce a biological heir, the intellectual property reverts to the Hunt family. Dante pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Julian is about to prove that Arthur has no biological heir. He thinks he's destroying you, but he's actually handing the entire company to us. Cassidy stared at him. Us? I don't want the company, Dante said, tossing the flash drive to Cassidy. I run a private security firm in London. I don't have time for board meetings, but I do have time for revenge. He checked his watch. Julian's press conference is in 1 hour. If you walk out on that stage and play this drive right after he plays his video, you won't just keep the company. You'll dismantle his entire existence. But I'm not Arthur's daughter, Cassidy said. The will. The will leaves the estate to Cassidy Hart. Elias realized, his eyes widening. It doesn't say, my daughter, Cassidy Hart. It just names you. The trust was built on the assumption of blood, but the will is specific to the individual. Exactly, Dante said. You are the legal owner, but Julian is trying to use the fraud argument to void the will. But if you prove that Arthur knew you weren't his daughter and left it to you anyway, there is no fraud. But the video, Cassidy stammered. Arthur says he lied. He lied to Sarah, Dante corrected. He never lied to the lawyers. Look at the wording in the trust documents, Elias. Does it say issue or does it say beneficiary? Elias scrambled to open the briefcase. He scanned the documents. My God, it says I hereby bequeath to Cassidy Hart. It never specifies paternity as a condition of inheritance. So, Cassidy said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Julian is going to go on TV, prove that I'm not a Sterling, thinking it disqualifies me. And in doing so, Dante finished, he proves that Arthur knowingly left his fortune to a Hunt. It validates the will, and thanks to the reversion clause, I'm holding it, strips the company of its core assets if Julian does manage to win. It's a trap, Cassidy breathed. Arthur set a trap for Julian from the grave. And we, Dante said, offering his arm to his sister, are going to spring it. Suddenly the door banged open. Security guards, Julian's men, filled the hallway. Ms. Hart, one of them shouted, you are being escorted from the building. Dante stepped in front of her. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened his trench coat, revealing a shoulder holster, and looked the lead guard in the eye. I don't think so, Dante said calmly. Ms. Hart has a press conference to attend, and I'd hate for you to be unemployed when she gets back. The guard hesitated. He looked at Dante, then at Cassidy. Let them pass, the guard muttered. Cassidy walked past them, her head high. She had walked into the courthouse that morning as a waitress. She had walked out as a billionaire. Now she was walking into the fire as something else entirely. A Hunt. The grand ballroom of the Sterling Hotel was a sea of flashing lights. Every major news network was broadcasting live. Julian Sterling stood at the podium, looking every inch the victorious emperor. He wore a fresh suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, his smile dazzling and predatory. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian boomed into the microphone. I stand before you, not just as a CEO, but as a son defending his father's legacy. Today we expose a crime of unprecedented scale. A woman has walked into our lives claiming to be my sister, claiming to be a Sterling. But the truth is far uglier. He gestured to the massive screen behind him. Roll the footage. The room went dark. The grainy video of Arthur Sterling flickered to life. The dead billionaire confessed his sins. He admitted that Cassidy was not his biological daughter. He admitted to forging the DNA tests. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions. The stock ticker at the bottom of the news feeds plummeted. "You see," Julian shouted over the noise, "she is a fraud, a con artist, and under the fraudulent pretense statute of the estate law. Her claim is void. The company is mine." Julian spread his arms, basking in the flashbulbs. He looked like a god. Then the side doors swung open. It wasn't security. It was Cassidy Hart. She walked down the center aisle. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was flanked by Elias Thorne on her left and Dante Hunt on her right. She walked with a rhythm that silenced the room row by row. "She has some nerve showing her face," a reporter whispered. Cassidy walked straight up the stairs to the stage. Julian laughed. "Came to surrender the keys, waitress?" Julian sneered, leaning over the podium. "The police are on their way. You're going to prison for fraud." Cassidy reached past him and took the microphone. She didn't fight him for the podium. She stood next to it, small but immovable. "You're right, Julian," Cassidy said. Her voice was calm, amplified through the speakers. "I'm not Arthur Sterling's biological daughter." The crowd gasped. An admission of guilt. "I am the daughter of Gabriel Hunt," she continued, gesturing to Dante. "The man Arthur destroyed to build this company." She turned to the audience. "Arthur didn't leave me the company because I was his blood. He left it to me because he knew I was the only one who could save it from him." She pointed at Julian. "That's a nice story," Julian mocked. "But the law doesn't care about feelings. The will assumes paternity. No paternity, no will." Actually, Elias Thorne stepped forward, holding a document. The will assumes identity. It names Cassidy Hart. Specificity overrides assumption. But that's a legal battle for another day. However, Dante Hunt stepped up. "This isn't." Dante plugged the flash drive into the presentation laptop. The screen behind them changed. It showed a patent document from 1995. "This is the foundational patent for Sterling Dynamics' processor technology," Dante announced. "It accounts for 80% of the company's revenue. It was acquired from my father, Gabriel Hunt." He clicked a button. A highlighted clause appeared. "The reversion clause," Dante read, "in the event that the Sterling estate is no longer controlled by a named beneficiary of Arthur Sterling's choosing all intellectual property rights, revert immediately to the Hunt family trust." The room went dead silent. Cassidy looked at Julian. "Arthur knew this day would come. He knew you would find out I wasn't his daughter, so he built a fail-safe. If you disqualify me as the heir, the company loses its patents. It becomes a shell. Worthless." She took a step closer to Julian. "If you win, Julian, you inherit a corpse. The stock will go to zero by tomorrow morning. You'll be the king of nothing." Julian stared at the screen. He looked at the clause. He looked at the horrified faces of the board members in the front row. He did the math. "But," Julian stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "But if you stay—" "If I stay," Cassidy said, "I am the named beneficiary. The patents stay. The company survives." She looked out at the shareholders. "So here is your choice. You can have a pure Sterling running a bankrupt company, or you can have a Hunt running a trillion-dollar empire. Who do you want?" "Cassidy!" someone shouted from the back. "Cassidy!" Another voice joined in. Within seconds, the room was chanting her name. The board members were standing up, turning their backs on Julian. Julian grabbed the microphone, his eyes wild. "No, you can't do this. I am the son. I am the heir." "You're a liability," Archibald Vane shouted from the front row. "Security, get him off the stage." The same guards Julian had hired, the men he had screamed at that morning marched onto the stage. Julian tried to run, but Marcus Graves, the head of security, grabbed him by the collar of his $3,000 suit. "Let go of me, I'm Julian Sterling," he shrieked, kicking and flailing as they dragged him toward the exit. "And I," Cassidy said into the mic, watching him disappear, "am the one signing your severance check." As the doors closed on Julian's screaming figure, Cassidy looked at Dante and Elias. They smiled. She looked at the crowd, at the flashing lights, at the empire that was now hers, not by blood, but by victory. She touched the cuff of her silk jacket, remembering the snag in her grey sweater. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a billionaire. She was justice. And just like that, the man who mocked a poor girl for her worn-out shoes lost everything to her in a single heartbeat. Julian Sterling thought power was about bloodlines and expensive suits. He thought he could crush Cassidy Hart because she had nothing. But he forgot the most important lesson of all true power isn't what you inherit. It's what you survive. Cassidy didn't just take his money. She took his pride, his legacy, and his world. She proved that a waitress with a heart of steel is worth more than a billionaire with a soul of paper. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karmic justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this with a friend who needs to see a bully get what they deserve and hit. Subscribe with the notification bell on so you never miss our next story. We have a shocking tale coming up next week about a homeless man who, well, let's just say you won't believe who his grandfather was. Thanks for watching.